A predatory loan enforcer viciously struck a 32-year-old single mother, sending her crashing into a table in front of her terrified 7-year-old daughter. The crowded bar fell silent. Everyone present just stood there, paralyzed by years of fear, too intimidated to intervene. The enforcer sneered, convinced he ruled this small Texas town with impunity. He believed his reign of terror was unbreakable, but he committed one catastrophic error. He didn't know her estranged brother was a Navy SEAL, and that he and his trained canine partner were already en route to that very location. The morning sun broke over Pinewood, Texas, with the kind of relentless optimism that felt almost cruel. Gladys Foster stood at the kitchen counter of her late father's house, packing a lunch she couldn't quite afford into a worn pink lunchbox, decorated with fading unicorn stickers. Her hands moved with practiced efficiency: peanut butter sandwich, apple slices in a plastic bag, 3 store-brand cookies she'd bought on sale. The math was always running in the background of her mind. $2.37 for today's lunch, which meant she could skip breakfast herself and save the oatmeal for tomorrow. The house still smelled like him sometimes: Old Spice and coffee, motor oil and sawdust. Her father had been a mechanic, the kind of man who could fix anything with patience and electrical tape. He'd left her this modest ranch-style home on the edge of town, 3 bedrooms and a sagging front porch, paid off after 40 years of work. It should have been a blessing. Instead, it had become the centerpiece of a nightmare she couldn't escape. "Mama, can I wear the blue shirt?" Shelley's voice drifted from the hallway, small and bright as a songbird. "The one with the butterfly or the one with the stripes, baby?" "Butterfly." Gladys smiled, despite the exhaustion that lived in her bones. 7 years old, and Shelley still believed in butterflies and magic, and the fundamental goodness of the world. Gladys would burn herself to ashes before she let that light go out. She found her daughter standing in front of the bathroom mirror, dark hair tangled from sleep, trying to button her shirt with the fierce concentration only a child could muster. Gladys knelt behind her, gently taking over the task. "There you go, beautiful girl." She pressed a kiss to the top of Shelley's head, breathing in the strawberry scent of discount shampoo. "Are we going to be okay, Mama?" The question came out of nowhere, the way children's questions always did, direct and devastating. Gladys met her daughter's eyes in the mirror. Those eyes were too knowing for 7 years old, shadowed by the divorce that had torn their family apart 18 months ago. Shelley had heard the arguments, seen her mother cry over bills spread across the kitchen table, felt the tension that came with barely surviving. "We're going to be just fine," Gladys said, and prayed it wasn't a lie. The drive to Pinewood Elementary took 8 minutes through streets lined with live oaks and century-old houses that had seen better decades. Shelley chattered about her friend Emma, about the art project they were doing with colored pasta, about whether dogs dreamed in color or black and white. Gladys made the appropriate sounds of interest while her mind calculated $43 until Friday's paycheck, $17 in checking, negative $206 if you counted the overdraft she was pretending didn't exist. The school drop-off line moved with agonizing slowness. Gladys watched other mothers in their clean cars, wearing clothes that fit properly, carrying travel mugs of coffee that probably cost more than her entire grocery budget. She didn't resent them. She was just so tired of being afraid. "Love you to the moon and back," Gladys said when they finally reached the front. "And around all the stars." Shelley finished their ritual, then scrambled out with her backpack bouncing against her small shoulders. Gladys waited until her daughter disappeared through the school's front doors before allowing her smile to collapse. She sat for a moment in the parking lot of Pinewood Elementary, gripping the steering wheel of her 13-year-old Honda Civic, trying to remember how to breathe through the weight crushing her chest. Her ex-husband Tyler had vanished 6 months ago, just stopped showing up to his construction job one Tuesday, and never came home. The child support had stopped immediately. Then came the letters from a law firm she'd never heard of, informing her that Tyler had taken out multiple high-interest loans using forged documents that listed her father's property as collateral. Loans she'd never signed for, never seen, never agreed to. But Tyler had been living in her father's house when they were married, had access to documents, had apparently spent 18 months planning his escape, while she'd been working double shifts and raising their daughter. The debt collectors said she owed $73,000. The lawyer she couldn't afford to hire had looked at the paperwork and told her it would take years to prove fraud, and in the meantime, the interest was compounding daily. Rosie's Diner sat on the corner of Main Street and Oak, a relic from the 1960s, with red vinyl booths and a checkerboard floor that had been walked to a dull sheen. Gladys pushed through the glass door at 8:47 a.m., tied her apron with practiced speed, and slipped into the rhythm that had sustained her for the past 3 years. "Morning, sunshine," Rosie called from the kitchen. She was 63 years old, built like a fire hydrant, with a voice roughened by 40 years of cigarettes she'd finally quit. She'd hired Gladys when no one else would, had let her work flexible hours around Shelley's schedule, had slipped her leftover food at the end of shifts without ever making it feel like charity. Morning, Rosie. The breakfast rush hit at 9:15. Truckers, construction workers, the crew from the lumber yard on the edge of town. Gladys moved between tables with her notepad and her professional smile, her hand cramping as she wrote orders for eggs over easy, biscuits and gravy, coffee black and coffee with cream. Her feet ached in the sneakers she'd resoled twice already. Her lower back sent up warning flares she'd learned to ignore. She was refilling coffee at table 6 when she saw him through the window. Donald Franklin, leaning against a black pickup truck across the street, watching the diner with the patience of a predator. He was a thick-shouldered man in his late 40s, with a face like weathered leather and eyes that held no warmth whatsoever. He'd come to her house twice already, each visit more threatening than the last. He worked for Vincent Gallo, the man who held Tyler's fraudulent loans, the man who wanted her father's property one way or another. The coffee pot shook in Gladys's hand. Hot liquid sloshed over the rim, burning her knuckle. She gasped and pulled back. "You all right, honey?" The trucker at table 6 looked up with concern. "Fine. Just clumsy today." She forced the smile back onto her face and hurried to the kitchen. Rosie took one look at her and grabbed her shoulders. "What's wrong?" "He's outside." Franklin. Through the kitchen window they watched him light a cigarette, still watching the diner's front door. "Waiting. You want me to call the sheriff?" Rosie asked. But they both knew it was a useless question. Sheriff Briggs played poker with Gallo every Thursday night. The whole town knew who really ran Pinewood. "He hasn't done anything," Gladys said. "Not yet. But he would." She could feel it in her bones, the way animals sense approaching storms. Donald Franklin was done with warnings. She finished her shift in a fog of dread, watching the clock drag toward 2:30 when she'd need to pick up Shelley. When she finally walked to her car, Franklin was gone. But tucked under her windshield wiper was a piece of paper, another copy of the loan documents, with a date circled in red ink. Friday, 5 p.m. 3 days away. Below the date, someone had written in block capitals, "Sign OR, regret it." Gladys's hands shook as she unlocked her car. She sat in the driver's seat, with the unsigned documents in her lap, looking at her father's house address, printed in cold legal text. This house where she'd learned to ride a bike, where her mother had taught her to make cornbread, where Shelley now slept surrounded by nightlights because the divorce had left her afraid of the dark. 3 days. She started the engine and drove toward Pinewood Elementary, where her daughter would be waiting with paint on her hands and stories about colored pasta. Gladys would smile and listen, and pretend that everything was fine, because that's what mothers did. They carried the fear so their children didn't have to. But somewhere deep in her chest, beneath the exhaustion and the terror, a small spark of defiance flickered. Her father had taught her to fix broken things. He taught her that some things were worth fighting for, even when you were tired, even when you were scared. She wouldn't sign, she wouldn't give Franklin what he wanted, and she had no idea that decision would change everything. Thursday afternoon brought the kind of heat that made asphalt shimmer and tempers flare. The lunch rush had finally died down, leaving Rosie's diner in that quiet lull between 2 and 4, when the only customers were retirees nursing coffee and the occasional traveler passing through on Highway 71. Gladys was wiping down the counter, her mind already calculating whether she had enough gas to make it to Saturday, when the bell above the door chimed. She looked up and felt her stomach drop. Donald Franklin walked in like he owned the place, flanked by 2 men she didn't recognize. Franklin wore jeans and a black polo shirt stretched tight across his barrel chest, his boots clicking against the checkerboard floor with deliberate heaviness. The men behind him were younger, harder, the kind of muscle that came from prison yards rather than gyms. One had a teardrop tattoo beneath his left eye. The other kept his hands in his pockets in a way that suggested he was carrying something he wanted people to know about. The 3 remaining customers, old Mr. Peterson, a tourist couple from their rental car plates, all suddenly became very interested in their coffee cups. The tourist woman's hand trembled slightly as she reached for her purse. "We're closed for a private meeting," Franklin announced to the room, his voice carrying the casual authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed. Mr. Peterson was out the door in 15 seconds, leaving a $10 bill on the table for a $4 check. The tourists followed even faster, the woman clutching her husband's arm. The bell chimed twice more, and then the diner was empty except for Gladys, the 3 men, and Rosie, who emerged from the kitchen with a spatula still in her hand. "We don't want any trouble here, Franklin," Rosie said, her voice steady despite her age. "This is a legitimate business." Franklin smiled, and it was the most unsettling thing Gladys had ever seen, cold and mechanical, like someone had explained the concept of smiling but never understood what it meant. "No trouble at all, Rosie. Just need a word with your employee here. Business conversation. Gladys doesn't have any business with you." "Actually," Franklin said, pulling a manila envelope from under his arm, "she has quite a bit of business with my employer, Mr. Gallo." $73,000 worth, to be precise. Gladys's throat went dry. She gripped the rag in her hand so tightly her knuckles went white. I don't owe your employer anything. Those loans were taken out by my ex-husband without my knowledge or consent. That's a legal matter for the courts, Franklin said, stepping closer to the counter. His cologne was overwhelming, something expensive and aggressive that made her eyes water. But here's the thing about courts, Gladys. They're slow, real slow. Could take years to sort out who signed what and when. Meanwhile, interest compounds. Penalties add up. That 73 grand? Could be 150 by the time a judge even looks at your case. He slid the manila envelope across the counter. It came to rest inches from her hand. Mr. Gallo is a reasonable businessman. He understands you got caught up in your husband's mess. He's willing to be flexible. Gladys didn't touch the envelope. What does flexible mean? Means we consolidate the debt. One clean loan, 20-year term, using your daddy's property as collateral. House is worth maybe $200,000 in the current market. More than enough to cover the principal plus fees. You make your payments on time, everybody's happy. You keep your home, Gallo gets his money, and we all move on with our lives. The man with the teardrop tattoo shifted his weight, and Gladys caught a glimpse of something metallic tucked into his waistband. Her heart hammered against her ribs. And if I don't sign, the words came out smaller than she intended. Franklin's smile widened. Then we go through the courts. Gallo files for immediate seizure based on the original loan documents. And yes, before you ask, Tyler's signature is all over those documents. Nice and legal. Doesn't matter if you knew about it or not. Marital property is marital property. You'll be evicted within 60 days, maybe 90 if you get a sympathetic judge, which you won't. Because Judge Atwater plays golf with Gallo every Sunday. Your credit will be destroyed. You'll be lucky to rent a studio apartment, much less find a place that'll take a woman with a kid and no references. Rosie stepped closer, her spatula raised like a weapon. You threatening her in my establishment? Not threatening. Explaining. There's a difference. Franklin's eyes never left Gladys's face. See, the thing about Pinewood is, everybody knows everybody. Your daughter goes to school here. You work here. Your whole life is in this town. Now, Mr. Gallo, he's patient, but he's also a businessman. He can't have people thinking they can just walk away from their obligations. Sets a bad precedent. The envelope sat on the counter between them, like a coiled snake. I need time to think, Gladys said. You've had 6 months to think. We've sent letters, made phone calls, been real polite about the whole situation. But Mr. Gallo's patience has limits. Franklin tapped the envelope with one thick finger. Paperwork's all there. Nice and simple. You sign, we get it notarized, everybody goes home happy. Your payment would be what, maybe $800 a month? That's less than rent in most places. $800 a month. Gladys currently made about $1,900 after taxes, working 50 hours a week between the diner and weekend shifts at the truck stop on Highway 71. Rent, utilities, food, Shelley's school supplies, the car payment, insurance. It was already impossible. 800 more would bury them. But losing the house would bury them faster. I can't afford $800 a month. Franklin shrugged, a gesture of elaborate unconcern. Pick up more shifts, get a second job, plenty of options for a motivated person. The alternative is you lose everything and still owe the money. At least this way you keep a roof over your kid's head. The way he said your kid made Gladys's skin crawl. There was an implication there, a subtle threat wrapped in false concern. Don't talk about my daughter. Nobody's talking about anybody, Franklin said, his voice dropping to something quieter and infinitely more dangerous. But kids need stability, don't they? Need to feel safe. Would be a shame if something disrupted that sense of security. Rosie moved faster than Gladys would have thought possible for a woman her age, putting herself between Gladys and the counter. Get out, right now, before I call the sheriff. Franklin laughed, a short, barking sound devoid of humor. Sheriff Briggs? Sure, call him. Tell him Donald Franklin stopped by to discuss a legitimate debt collection. See what he says. They all knew what he'd say. Briggs would take down a report that went nowhere. Maybe tell Gladys to get a lawyer she couldn't afford, and that would be the end of it. The law in Pinewood had been bought and paid for, long before Gladys ever moved back to her father's house. She stared at the manila envelope, thinking about Shelley's face that morning, asking if they were going to be okay. Thinking about her father's hands, scarred and strong, building the life he wanted one day at a time. Thinking about Tyler, who had stolen and lied and disappeared, leaving her to clean up the wreckage. No, she said quietly. Franklin's eyebrows rose. No, I'm not signing anything. Those aren't my loans. I didn't take that money, I didn't spend it, and I'm not going to hand over my father's house, because my ex-husband is a thief and a coward. The silence that followed was absolute. Even the ancient refrigerator behind the counter seemed to hold its breath. Franklin's expression didn't change, but something shifted in his eyes. A coldness that had been barely contained now rising to the surface like ice forming over water. He picked up the envelope slowly, tapping it against his palm. That's disappointing, Gladys. Really disappointing. Mr. Gallo gave you an opportunity to handle this like civilized people. Tell Mr. Gallo he can take his opportunity and... Careful, Franklin interrupted, his voice soft as a razor. You want to think real careful about what you say next. Rosie's hand found Gladys's shoulder, squeezing once in warning or support, or both. Franklin tucked the envelope back under his arm. You've got until tomorrow. 5 o'clock. After that, things get complicated. You understand what complicated means. I understand threats when I hear them. Good. Then you understand I'm not making threats. I'm explaining consequences. He turned toward the door, his two companions falling into step behind him. At the threshold, he paused and looked back over his shoulder. You got a pretty little girl, Gladys, 7 years old, right? Pinewood Elementary, Mrs. Patterson's class. Likes to draw pictures of butterflies. The world tilted sideways. Gladys felt all the air leave her lungs in a rush. You go near my daughter. Nobody's going near anybody, Franklin said. Just making conversation. Just noting that you got responsibilities. People depending on you to make smart choices. His smile returned, colder than before. 5 o'clock tomorrow. Murphy's Bar. Bring your ID for the notary. Then he was gone. The door swinging shut behind him with a cheerful chime that felt obscene in the sudden silence. Gladys's legs gave out. She would have fallen if Rosie hadn't been there to catch her, guiding her into the nearest booth. Her whole body was shaking, adrenaline flooding her system too late to be useful. He knows where she goes to school, Gladys whispered. He knows her teacher's name. We're calling the police right now. And tell them what? That a debt collector mentioned public information? They won't do anything, Rosie. You know they won't. Rosie sat down across from her, the spatula finally coming to rest on the table. Her weathered face was creased with worry. You can't give them that house, honey. That's your daughter's inheritance. Your future. What future? If something happens to Shelley, nothing's gonna happen to Shelley. But they both knew that was a lie. In Pinewood, when men like Vincent Gallo wanted something, they took it. And Donald Franklin was the hand that did the taking. Gladys pressed her palms against her eyes, trying to stop the tears, trying to think through the panic. 24 hours. She had 24 hours to decide whether to hand over everything her father had worked for, or risk everything she had left. There was no good choice. There was only which way to lose. You'll regret making this difficult, she whispered, repeating Franklin's parting words. Outside, the Texas sun beat down on Pinewood without mercy, and somewhere in the shadows, Donald Franklin was already planning his next move. Friday evening settled over Pinewood with the promise of weekend relief, and Gladys Foster decided that fear would not steal this moment from her daughter. She'd spent the day at Rosie's diner jumping at shadows, watching the door, her mind spinning through impossible scenarios. But at 5:47 p.m., when she picked up Shelley from her after-school program, she made a choice. They would have dinner somewhere normal, somewhere safe, somewhere that reminded them both that life could still contain small pleasures. Murphy's Bar had been a Pinewood institution for 40 years, the kind of establishment that straddled the line between restaurant and tavern with practiced ease. In the early evening, before the serious drinking crowd arrived, it was family-friendly. Wood-paneled walls decorated with vintage beer signs, booths with cracked vinyl that had been patched with duct tape, and a menu that featured burgers, chicken tenders, and the best sweet potato fries in the county. Gladys's father had brought her here as a child. She wanted Shelley to have that same memory. They slid into a booth near the back, beneath a neon Lone Star sign that flickered intermittently. Shelley immediately grabbed a crayon from the jar on the table and started decorating her paper placemat, humming something tuneless and content. Can I get the chicken fingers, Mama? With fries or fruit? Fries. Shelley's face lit up with the pure joy that only a 7-year-old could extract from fried potatoes. Gladys ordered a burger she probably wouldn't eat, and a water with lemon. The knot in her stomach had been there since yesterday, tightening every hour that brought her closer to Franklin's deadline. It was past 5 o'clock now. She'd missed his appointment. But here, watching her daughter color a rainbow that defied all conventional color theory, Gladys let herself believe that maybe Franklin would just go away. Maybe he'd find easier prey. Maybe. The door swung open with enough force to rattle the beer signs. Donald Franklin walked in with the same 2 men from the diner, plus a third she didn't recognize. They moved with the coordinated purpose of a pack, spreading out to cover the exits. The Friday evening crowd, maybe 15 people scattered across booths and bar stools, went quiet the way small animals go quiet when a predator enters their territory. Franklin's eyes found Gladys immediately. He smiled. There she is, he said, loud enough for everyone to hear. The lady who doesn't answer her phone. Gladys's hand found Shelley's across the table, squeezing tight. Not now. Not here. You were supposed to meet me at 5 o'clock, Franklin said, walking toward their booth with deliberate slowness. Had a notary waiting and everything. Very unprofessional to waste people's time like that. Jake Murphy, the owner's 19-year-old son working the bar, stepped forward. He was a tall kid, gangly and uncertain, with his father's red hair and a tattoo of a cross on his forearm. "Hey man, we don't want any trouble. This is a family place." "Then it's a good thing I'm here to discuss family business," Franklin said without looking at him. His attention remained fixed on Gladys like a spotlight. "Gladys, we need to talk. Outside would be better, but if you want to do this in front of all these good people, that works too." "Mama?" Shelley's voice was small and frightened, her crayons forgotten. "It's okay, baby. This man is just leaving." Franklin laughed, that same cold, mechanical sound from the diner. "I'm not going anywhere until we settle this. You've been dodging me for 6 months, making excuses, playing victim. But here's the reality check. You owe money. Real money. And Mr. Gallo has been more than patient." Gladys stood up, positioning herself between Franklin and her daughter. Her legs felt unsteady, but her voice came out stronger than she felt. "I don't owe your boss anything. My ex-husband forged those documents. I've told you that 100 times, and I've told you 100 times that's something for the courts to decide. But the courts take time, and time costs money. Your money." He pulled the manila envelope from his jacket again, slapping it down on their table hard enough to make the silverware jump. "Sign the papers, transfer the deed, we consolidate the debt, and everybody moves on." "No." The word hung in the air between them, simple and final. Franklin's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "You think you're being brave? You think standing up to me makes you some kind of hero? All it makes you is stupid. Get away from us." "Or what?" He leaned closer, his voice dropping to something more dangerous. "What are you gonna do, Gladys? Call the sheriff? He's having dinner with Judge Atwater right now, 2 blocks away. Want me to call him for you? We can all have a nice conversation about legitimate debt collection." Around them, the bar's patrons were frozen. An older couple near the door started gathering their things with urgent, silent movements. A construction worker at the bar suddenly became fascinated with his phone. Jake Murphy had gone pale, his hand hovering near the landline behind the bar but not quite picking it up. "Mama, I'm scared." Shelley was crying now, tears streaming down her cheeks. Something inside Gladys cracked open. Not fear anymore, but fury. This man had invaded her workplace, threatened her child, and now he was ruining one of the few good moments she'd tried to give her daughter. She straightened to her full height, which was still 8 inches shorter than Franklin, and spoke with a clarity that surprised even herself. "Get out of this bar. Get out of my life. And tell Vincent Gallo that he can take his fake loans and his threats and his corrupt judges and go straight to hell." For 3 seconds, nothing happened. Then Franklin moved faster than a man his size should have been able to move. His hand shot out and grabbed the envelope from the table, and when Gladys tried to step back, he caught her wrist in a grip like iron. "You don't talk to me like that," he said, his face inches from hers. "You don't talk about Mr. Gallo like that. And you sure as hell don't tell me no. Let go of me. You're gonna sign these papers right now, or—" "I said let go." Gladys yanked her arm back with all her strength. She broke free but stumbled backward, off balance. Franklin's face contorted with rage, pure, undisguised rage, that transformed his features into something monstrous. His hand came up and across in a vicious backhand that connected with her cheekbone, with a sound like a baseball bat hitting leather. The world exploded into white light and pain. Gladys felt herself falling, saw the edge of the neighboring table rushing up to meet her, felt her hip collide with the corner in an explosion of agony. She crashed to the floor in a tangle of limbs and overturned chairs, tasting blood where her teeth had cut the inside of her cheek. Shelley's scream cut through everything. High and terrified and utterly helpless. "Mama!" Through the ringing in her ears, Gladys heard Franklin's boots on the floor, coming closer. She tried to get up, but her body wouldn't respond correctly. Her vision swam with stars and shadows. "That's what happens when you disrespect people," Franklin said, standing over her. "That's what happens when you make things difficult." Someone in the bar gasped. Someone else cursed quietly. But nobody moved. Nobody intervened. Gladys managed to roll onto her side, tasting blood and humiliation. Her daughter was sobbing in the booth, too terrified to come to her, and that somehow hurt worse than the blow itself. Franklin crouched down, bringing his face level with hers. His breath smelled like mint and malice. "You've got until Monday morning, 9 a.m. Bring the signed papers to Gallo's office on River Street, or we file for immediate seizure and eviction. And next time you make me chase you down, it won't be a slap." He stood, brushing off his jeans, as if he'd just accomplished some distasteful but necessary task. To the frozen patrons of Murphy's bar, he said, "Anybody got a problem with what just happened? You know where to find me." Silence. Franklin nodded, satisfied. "That's what I thought." He walked toward the door, his 3 associates falling in behind him. Just before he left, he paused and looked back at Jake Murphy, who had his phone in his hand. frozen in the act of deciding whether to call for help. "Put that away, kid. You don't want to get involved in business that doesn't concern you." Jake's hand trembled, but slowly. So slowly it broke something in Gladys's heart. He lowered the phone. Then Franklin was gone, the door swinging shut behind him, leaving only the aftermath of violence and the sound of Shelley's desperate crying. Gladys lay on the floor of Murphy's bar, her face throbbing, blood on her tongue, and felt the weight of her powerlessness crushing down like a physical thing. Around her, people were finally moving. A woman rushing over with napkins, Jake Murphy coming around the bar, someone saying they should call an ambulance. But all Gladys could focus on was her daughter's face, contorted with fear and incomprehension, learning in real time that the world could be cruel and that sometimes mothers couldn't protect you from it. "I'm okay, baby," Gladys whispered, though she wasn't. "Mama's okay." It was another lie in a week of lies. But what else could she say? Outside, in the parking lot of Murphy's bar, Jake Murphy's phone buzzed in his pocket. He'd lowered it when Franklin told him to, but his thumb had already hit record on the video. And before Franklin had even reached his truck, Jake had sent that video to the one contact Gladys had given him 3 years ago, back when she'd first returned to Pinewood and listed him as her emergency contact. "Daniel Spears, brother, Navy SEAL, currently stationed 20 miles outside Austin." The message was simple. She needs you. Now. And 20 miles away, a warrior who thought he'd lost his sister to pride and stubbornness watched a video of a man striking her in front of her child, and something ancient and terrible ignited in his chest. The reckoning was coming. Franklin just didn't know it yet. Jake Murphy's hands were shaking so badly he could barely hold his phone steady. He ducked behind the bar the moment Franklin's truck roared out of the parking lot, his heart hammering against his ribs like it was trying to escape his chest. The video was still recording when he finally managed to hit stop. 2 minutes and 43 seconds of the worst thing he'd ever witnessed in his father's bar. Around him, Murphy's bar remained in a state of shocked paralysis. The older couple who'd been eating fish and chips had left money on their table and fled without a word. The construction worker at the bar was staring into his beer like he could find absolution at the bottom of the glass. A woman who'd watched the whole thing was crying quietly into her napkins, but she hadn't moved to help. Nobody had moved to help. Nobody except the waitress, Linda, who was on her knees next to Gladys, pressing a clean towel to the cut above her eyebrow. Shelley was still sobbing in the booth, her small body curled into itself, and the sound of it made Jake want to put his fist through the mirror behind the bar. He'd frozen. When it mattered, when Franklin had grabbed Gladys's wrist, Jake had stood there like a statue and done absolutely nothing. He'd watched a man hit a woman in front of her child, and his body had simply refused to move, paralyzed by the knowledge of who Donald Franklin worked for and what happened to people who interfered in Vincent Gallo's business. 3 years ago, a mechanic named Tommy Briggs had filed a complaint against one of Gallo's collectors. 2 weeks later, his garage burned to the ground. No arrests were made. Sheriff Briggs, Tommy's cousin, though that apparently meant nothing, had called it an electrical fire. Everyone in Pinewood knew better. That's how it worked in this town. You kept your head down, you minded your business, and you survived. But Jake was 19 years old, and that little girl's screaming wouldn't stop echoing in his head. His father kept an emergency contact list under the register, numbers for regulars who'd given them in case something happened while they were at the bar, back when his dad still believed Murphy's was the kind of place where the worst emergency might be someone drinking too much and needing a ride home. Jake had memorized most of them over the years, helping out behind the bar since he was old enough to reach the taps. Gladys Foster's contact was different from the others. She'd filled it out 3 years ago when she first started coming in, right after she moved back to Pinewood. One name, one number, Daniel Spears, brother, Navy SEAL. But sending it to Gladys's brother felt like crossing a line, like activating something irreversible. His phone buzzed in his hand, making him jump. A text from his father, who was at a supplier meeting in Austin. "Everything okay?" Alarm system showing front door activity. Jake stared at the message. He could tell his father what happened, and his dad would call Sheriff Briggs, and Briggs would take a statement that went nowhere. Or he could tell his father everything was fine, which was a lie but would keep him from worrying. Or, Gladys's voice cut through his paralysis. "Shelley, baby, look at me. Look at Mama. I'm okay. I promise I'm okay." But she wasn't okay. Even from behind the bar, Jake could see the way her left eye was already swelling shut, the split in her lip, the way she was holding her ribs like breathing hurt. And Shelley wasn't okay either. The little girl who usually colored pictures and asked for extra cherries in her Shirley Temple was traumatized, her face streaked with tears and snot, her small hands clutching her mother like the world might tear them apart at any second. Jake made his decision. He opened a new message to the number listed under Daniel Spears, attached the video file, and typed, "She needs you. Now. Murphy's Bar, Pinewood TX. Franklin from Gallows Operation just assaulted her in front of her daughter. Nobody stopped him. I'm sorry. This is Jake Murphy. I work here. She has you listed as emergency contact. His finger hovered over the send button for 3 seconds. That felt like hours. Then he hit send. The message showed as delivered immediately. Then the 3 dots appeared indicating someone was typing. The response came back in under 10 seconds. On my way. Keep her safe. Is she hurt bad? Jake looked across the bar at Gladys, who was now sitting up with Linda's help, blood on her shirt, her face already taking on the purple-yellow hues of serious bruising. Yes, he typed back. Face and ribs. Won't go to hospital. Probably afraid of bills. The next message was even faster. 20 minutes. Do not let Franklin come back. Jake's stomach dropped. 20 minutes. How was he supposed to keep Donald Franklin away from anything? He was a college dropout, working at his father's bar. Not a bouncer, not a cop, not anyone who mattered in the brutal arithmetic of Pinewood's criminal ecosystem. But then he looked at Shelley again, and something hardened in his chest. I won't, he typed, then put his phone in his pocket and came out from behind the bar. Linda was helping Gladys to her feet now, and the few remaining patrons were studiously avoiding eye contact. The construction worker left a 20 on the bar and walked out without finishing his beer. The crying woman followed moments later. Within 2 minutes, the only people left in Murphy's bar were Jake, Linda, Gladys, and Shelley. Do you want me to call the police? Linda asked, though her tone suggested she already knew the answer. Gladys shook her head, then winced at the movement. No point. Gladys, Jake said, and she looked up at him with one good eye, the other already swollen completely shut. I sent the video to your brother. To Daniel. He's coming. The color drained from her face. What color was left, anyway? You what? I sent him the video. Of Franklin hitting you. He said he'll be here in 20 minutes. Jake, you shouldn't have. She stopped, swaying on her feet. Linda caught her arm. He's your emergency contact, Jake said simply. This is an emergency. Gladys opened her mouth to argue, then closed it. She looked down at Shelley, who had finally stopped crying but was staring at nothing, with the 1,000-yard stare of someone who'd seen too much. When Gladys looked back up at Jake, there were tears on her cheeks mixing with the blood. I haven't talked to him in 3 years. Then it's been too long, Jake said. Outside, a truck engine rumbled to life somewhere in the distance. Jake's whole body tensed, but the sound faded away. Someone else, not Franklin, coming back. Not yet. He locked the front door and flipped the sign to closed. Then he went back behind the bar and pulled out the aluminum baseball bat his father kept under the register for emergencies. It felt absurdly inadequate in his hands, but it was something. Gladys was sitting in the booth now. Shelley curled up beside her, and Linda was bringing ice wrapped in a clean towel. The Friday evening lights of Pinewood glowed through the windows, indifferent to the violence that had just shattered 4 lives in different ways. Jake's phone buzzed again. 15 minutes. He gripped the baseball bat tighter and positioned himself where he could see both the front door and the parking lot through the window. He'd stood frozen once tonight. He wouldn't freeze again. Somewhere outside the fragile safety of Murphy's bar, Daniel Spears was coming. And when he arrived, everything would change. 20 miles outside Austin, Daniel Spears was running attack drills with Titan when his phone vibrated against his hip. The Belgian Malinois immediately dropped into a sit position, ears pricked forward, waiting for the next command. They'd been working for 2 hours in the evening heat, and both of them were streaked with dust and sweat. Daniel pulled the phone from his tactical belt, expecting a message from his team leader about next week's training schedule. Instead, he saw an unknown number from a 512 area code, Texas, somewhere in the hill country, and a video attachment. The preview text made his heart stutter. She needs you. Now. He pressed play. The video quality was shaky, shot from behind a bar, but the image was clear enough. A man in a black polo shirt standing over a booth. A woman's voice, defiant despite the fear underneath. Get away from us. Then movement, too fast, a hand coming up and across. The crack of flesh on flesh. A woman falling, crashing into furniture. And then, a child's scream, high and terrified and completely helpless. Mama. Daniel's blood didn't just run cold. It froze solid in his veins, then ignited into something molten and unstoppable. His hand tightened around the phone until the case creaked in protest. He knew that voice. He'd know it anywhere. Gladys. He watched the video 3 more times. His combat training automatically cataloging details, the attacker's stance, his weight distribution, the way he moved afterward. Confident, unhurried. A man who'd done this before and expected no consequences. The bar's layout. The exits. The crowd of frozen witnesses. The little girl in the booth who had to be Shelley, though he'd never met his niece. had never been allowed to meet her after the argument 3 years ago, when he'd told Gladys that marrying Tyler was a mistake. He'd been right. But being right felt like poison in his mouth now. Daniel pulled up the text thread. 20 minutes, he typed. Keep her safe. Is she hurt bad? The response confirmed what his eyes had already told him. Face and ribs. Won't go to hospital. Of course she wouldn't. Gladys had always been stubborn about asking for help, even when they were kids and she'd broken her arm falling off her bike. She'd walked a mile home rather than call him to pick her up. That same pride had driven a wedge between them, and he'd let it, too angry and self-righteous to bridge the gap. Now someone had put their hands on his sister, had struck her in front of her daughter. The rage that filled Daniel's chest was surgical and absolute. This wasn't the hot anger of a bar fight or the explosive fury of combat adrenaline. This was something colder, something that lived in the place where his SEAL training intersected with the primitive instinct to protect family. It was the kind of rage that made his hands steady and his thoughts crystalline clear. Titan, come. The dog was at his side instantly, sensing the shift in his handler's energy. Daniel didn't need to give any additional commands. They moved as one unit toward his truck, a battered Ford F-150 that had seen action on 3 continents and carried more secrets than its registration suggested. He typed another message as he drove. 15 minutes. The highway between Austin and Pinewood was empty this time of evening. Just long stretches of Texas darkness, punctuated by distant ranch lights. Daniel pushed the truck to 80, then 90, his mind running through tactical assessments with automatic precision. One attacker positively identified. Likely multiple associates based on the body language and positioning in the video. Unknown weapon status. Civilian environment. Multiple witnesses. Primary objective. Secure Gladys and Shelley. Secondary objective. Identify and neutralize the threat structure. But underneath the tactical thinking was something more primal. That was his sister. That was his niece. And someone had made them scream. Titan sat in the passenger seat, alert and focused, his dark eyes watching the road with the same intensity Daniel felt. They'd worked together for 4 years, had cleared buildings in 3 different countries, had saved each other's lives more times than Daniel could count. The dog could sense when they were going into action, and he was ready. We're gonna help them, boy, Daniel said quietly. We're gonna make this right. The miles disappeared beneath his tires. He passed a state trooper going the opposite direction and didn't slow down, let them try to pull him over. He'd show them the video and dare them to write a speeding ticket while his sister sat bleeding in some bar 20 miles ahead. The truck's GPS showed 17 minutes to Murphy's bar. Daniel cut it to 12. As he drove, his phone buzzed with another message from the unknown number. Jake Murphy, whoever that was. Door locked. She's safe for now. Trying to get her to let me call ambulance, but she's refusing. Daniel's jaw clenched. Stubborn. Always so damn stubborn. He typed back one-handed. Don't force her. I'm 8 minutes out. Nobody comes in or out until I get there. Then he did something he hadn't done in 3 years. He pulled up Gladys's contact, still saved in his phone despite everything, despite the silence, and called her number. It rang 4 times. Then her voice, thick with pain and emotion. Daniel? I'm coming, Gladdy. The childhood nickname slipped out unbidden. I saw the video. I'm 8 minutes away. A sound that might have been a laugh or a sob. You shouldn't come. This isn't your 8 minutes, he repeated, and his voice carried the weight of every operation he'd ever run, every promise he'd ever made and kept. Nobody touches you again. You understand me? Nobody. Silence on the other end. Then, so quiet he almost missed it. I'm sorry. For what I said. 3 years ago. We'll talk about it later. Right now, I need you to stay put and stay safe. I'm almost there. He ended the call and pressed the accelerator harder. The truck's engine roared in response. Pinewood appeared on the horizon, a scatter of lights against the darkness. Daniel knew this town. He'd grown up here, had learned to fight in the parking lot behind the high school, had enlisted at the recruiting station on Main Street. He knew its rhythms and its secrets and its corrupt underbelly. And now, someone in his hometown had made a catastrophic error in judgment. Murphy's bar came into view, a low building with neon signs glowing in the windows. Daniel parked half a block away, killing the engine and sitting in sudden silence. Through the front window, he could see figures moving, a young man with a baseball bat, a woman holding ice to another woman's face. Gladys. Tactical approach, Daniel said quietly to Titan. Low profile until we assess. But as he climbed out of the truck and moved toward the bar with Titan at his heel, every line of his body spoke a different language. He didn't look like a concerned brother coming to check on family. He looked like what he was, a weapon that had just acquired a target. The door was locked. Daniel tapped on the glass, 3 measured knocks. The young man with the baseball bat appeared, eyes wide when he saw Daniel's face and the dog beside him. He fumbled with the lock, pulled the door open. "You're him," Jake whispered. "You're Daniel." Daniel stepped inside, and his eyes went immediately to his sister, sitting in a booth with her face destroyed and her daughter clinging to her side. 3 years of silence, 3 years of stubborn pride on both sides, and this is what it had taken to bring him home. Gladys looked up at him with one eye swollen shut, and despite everything, the pain, the fear, the trauma, she smiled. "Hey, little brother," she said. Daniel crossed the bar in 4 strides, knelt beside the booth, and gently touched her unmarked cheek. "Who did this?" "His name is Donald Franklin. He works for a loan shark named Vincent Gallo." Daniel nodded once, committing the names to memory with the same finality he'd memorized target designations in a dozen different countries. "Not anymore," he said. And in that moment, Donald Franklin's world changed forever. He just didn't know it yet. Daniel had been inside Murphy's bar for exactly 11 minutes when Donald Franklin made his second mistake of the evening. The first had been hitting Gladys. The second was coming back. Daniel heard the truck before anyone else did. The distinctive rumble of the same black pickup from the video, pulling into the parking lot with the arrogance of a man who believed he owned this town. Titan's ears swiveled toward the sound, a low growl building in his chest. "Quiet," Daniel said, and the dog went silent but remained coiled like a spring. Gladys tensed in the booth, her good eye going wide. "That's him. That's Franklin's truck." Daniel stood and moved to the window, staying to the side where he wouldn't be immediately visible. 3 men climbed out of the pickup, Franklin and 2 others. The same crew from the video. They were laughing about something, confident and loose. Men who'd committed violence and expected no consequences. "Jake," Daniel said quietly, "take Gladys and Shelley to the back. The kitchen. Lock the door and don't come out until I say. What are you going to?" Now, the tone left no room for argument. Jake helped Gladys to her feet, and she clutched Shelley close as they moved toward the kitchen. Before disappearing through the door, Gladys looked back at her brother. "Daniel, please don't." "I'm not going to kill him," Daniel said. "But he's going to wish I had." The door closed. Daniel heard the lock click. Franklin's shadow appeared at the front window, hands cupped around his face as he peered inside. He rattled the door handle, found it locked, and knocked hard enough to rattle the frame. "Jake, open up." "Forgot my wallet." Daniel waited, counting silently. 3 seconds. 5. 10. Franklin knocked again, harder. "Jake, I know you're in there. I can see the lights on." Daniel crossed the bar in 4 silent steps and unlocked the door. Then he stepped back into the shadows near the pool table, Titan positioned beside him, and waited. Franklin pushed the door open, still talking over his shoulder to his companions. "Kid probably went to take a piss or something. Place better not be." He stopped mid-sentence when he saw the empty bar, the overturned chair still lying where Gladys had fallen, the blood-stained towel on the table. Something in the air felt wrong, a predator's instinct recognizing danger too late. "Jake, where you at?" Daniel stepped out of the shadows. Franklin spun toward him, and for a fraction of a second, confusion crossed his face. He saw a man in his late 30s, lean and weathered, wearing faded jeans and a gray t-shirt that showed the disciplined muscle of someone who trained every day. Nothing immediately threatening. Just another local, probably. Then his eyes met Daniel's, and every survival instinct he possessed started screaming. "Who the hell are you?" "Daniel Spears, Gladys's brother." Understanding dawned slowly, then, all at once. Franklin's hand moved toward his waistband, toward whatever he carried there, but he never completed the motion. Daniel closed the distance in 2 steps, his hand shooting out to intercept Franklin's wrist, with a grip that was simultaneously casual and absolutely unbreakable. He applied pressure to a specific nerve cluster, and Franklin's fingers went numb instantly, his weapon, a snub-nosed .38, clattering harmlessly to the floor. "Don't," Daniel said quietly. "You really don't want to do that." Franklin tried to pull back, tried to use his weight advantage, but it was like trying to move a mountain. Daniel shifted his stance minutely, and suddenly Franklin was off balance, his arm twisted at an angle that sent white-hot pain shooting up to his shoulder. "My associates are right outside." "Your associates saw Titan and decided they were paid to collect debts, not get mauled by a trained attack dog. They're currently sitting in your truck wondering if you're worth dying for." Spoiler, you're not. Through the window, Franklin could see his 2 men in the pickup's cab, watching with wide eyes as the German Shepherd stared them down from just inside the doorway, teeth bared in a silent promise. Daniel increased the pressure on Franklin's arm another degree. "Here's how this works. You're going to answer some questions. If you answer honestly and completely, you walk out of here with nothing broken. If you lie, or if you try something stupid, things get significantly more unpleasant. Are we clear? You're assaulting me. The pressure increased again. Franklin's knees buckled. Vincent Gallo, Daniel said. Tell me about his operation. How many collectors does he have working? Go to hell. Daniel's expression didn't change, but something shifted in his eyes. Something cold and patient that Franklin had never encountered in his years of intimidating civilians. This wasn't anger. This was professional interest in how much pain a human body could process. I've interrogated actual terrorists, Daniel said conversationally. People trained to resist questioning. People who believed dying for their cause was an honor. You want to know how long they lasted before they told me everything? Or do you want to save us both some time? Franklin's breathing was ragged, sweat beading on his forehead. The pain in his arm was exquisite, surgical, controlled. This wasn't a bar fight. This wasn't street violence. This was something else entirely. 7 collectors, Franklin gasped. Gallo has 7 of us working different territories. Names, Franklin listed them. Daniel committed each to memory. Where does Gallo operate from? Office on River Street. Above the pawn shop. How does he launder the money? I don't. The pressure increased a fraction. Real estate. He buys properties through shell companies, inflates the values, resells them. The loan operation is just one piece. Who's protecting him? Police? Judges? Franklin hesitated. Daniel didn't increase the pressure this time. He just waited with the infinite patience of someone who had nowhere else to be and all night to get answers. Sheriff Briggs is on payroll. Judge Atwater. 2 deputies. The county assessor. How much? $5,000 a month each. 10 for the judge. Daniel nodded slowly, his mind already constructing the full picture of corruption. This wasn't just a loan shark operation. It was a criminal enterprise that had metastasized through Pinewood's entire power structure. The loans you collect on, how many are fraudulent? Most of them. Gallo targets people going through divorces, foreclosures, bankruptcy. Forges signatures, inflates debts. By the time victims figure it out, he's already filed liens. How many victims total? I don't know exactly. Maybe 40. 50. Daniel's jaw tightened imperceptibly. 50 families. 50 lives destroyed or damaged. You hit my sister in front of her daughter. Franklin's face went white. Listen, I was just doing my job. Your job is terrorizing single mothers and traumatizing children? Gallo said to make an example. Gallo's not here right now. Daniel's voice dropped to something barely above a whisper. Right now, it's just you and me. And I want you to understand something very clearly. If you ever come near my sister again, if you even drive past her house, if you so much as think her name, I will find you. It won't matter where you run. It won't matter who you think can protect you. I've tracked targets through 3 countries and 2 continents. You think you can hide from me in Pinewood, Texas? I won't. I swear I won't. You're going to take your associates and leave. You're going to tell Gallo that the foster debt is canceled, forgiven, erased from his books. You're going to make sure every document related to that property is destroyed. He'll kill me. That's between you and your conscience. But if you don't do exactly what I just said, I guarantee Gallo will be the least of your problems. Daniel released Franklin's arm and stepped back. The enforcer stumbled, catching himself against a bar stool, his arm hanging useless and throbbing. Get out. Franklin scrambled for the door, his bravado completely shattered. He didn't even look back at his weapon still lying on the floor. The moment he was outside, he and his associates were in the truck, engine roaring to life, tires squealing as they fled into the night. Daniel picked up Franklin's .38, ejected the rounds, and slipped them into his pocket. Then he knocked on the kitchen door. It's over. You can come out. When Gladys emerged with Shelley in her arms, Daniel was standing in the middle of Murphy's bar, looking exactly as calm as when Franklin had walked in. But his sister saw what others might have missed, the slight tremor in his hands, the way his jaw was clenched, the cost of the control he'd just exercised. Is he gone? She whispered. He won't be back. Daniel, what did you... We need to make some phone calls, he said. Gallo's operation is bigger than one enforcer. This ends tonight. Daniel made the first call at 11:47 p.m. from the parking lot of Murphy's bar, his phone pressed to his ear while Titan sat alert beside him. Inside, Gladys was finally letting Linda clean her wounds properly, and Shelley had fallen into an exhausted sleep in the booth, wrapped in someone's jacket. Lieutenant Commander Holloway, a crisp voice answered, despite the late hour. Sir, it's Petty Officer Spears. I need to invoke personal emergency protocol and request immediate liaison with federal law enforcement. There was a pause, the sound of papers shuffling. Holloway was Daniel's direct superior at Naval Special Warfare Group, a career officer who'd learned to take his men seriously when they made unusual requests. What's the situation? My sister was assaulted tonight by a debt collector working for an organized criminal enterprise operating in Pinewood, Texas. The operation involves loan fraud, property theft, and corruption of local law enforcement and judiciary. I've obtained detailed intelligence on the network structure, personnel, and financial operations. How did you obtain this intelligence? The individual who assaulted my sister was persuaded to cooperate. Another pause, longer this time. Define persuaded. He'll need physical therapy for his shoulder, but nothing permanent. He'll walk and talk just fine. Holloway exhaled slowly. You're on leave, Spears. I'm aware, sir. But this situation requires federal intervention. Local authorities are compromised. I have video evidence of the assault, testimony from multiple witnesses, and detailed information about approximately 50 victims of systematic fraud. Stand by. The line went quiet for nearly 3 minutes. Daniel watched the darkened streets of Pinewood, thinking about how many families in this town were living under the same fear that had nearly destroyed his sister. 50 victims. 50 households terrorized by men like Franklin, while the people paid to protect them looked the other way. Spears. Holloway was back. I'm patching you through to Special Agent Nicole Reeves, FBI Financial Crimes Unit. She's been investigating loan sharking operations in Central Texas for 8 months. Apparently Pinewood has been on her radar. The line clicked, and a woman's voice came through, sharp and alert. Petty Officer Spears. This is Special Agent Reeves. Commander Holloway says you have information about the Gallo organization. Vincent Gallo operates out of River Street in Pinewood. I have names, locations, payment structures for corrupted officials, and testimony regarding systematic fraud, affecting approximately 50 victims. Can you send me the assault video? Daniel forwarded Jake's recording. He heard the agent's sharp intake of breath as she watched it. Jesus, is your sister okay? She will be. But there are 49 other families who won't be okay until this operation is shut down. I'm 2 hours away in Austin. Can you secure the witness, the young man who recorded this, and your sister until I arrive? Affirmative. They're not going anywhere. Good. Don't do anything else. Don't confront Gallo. Don't approach any of the corrupted officials. I need this case to be prosecutable. Understood. Daniel hesitated. Agent Reeves, how fast can you move on this? If your intelligence is solid, I can have warrants by Monday morning. But I need more than one victim's testimony to make RICO charges stick. You'll have it. Daniel ended the call and walked back into Murphy's bar. Jake was sitting at the bar now, still holding that baseball bat like a talisman. Gladys looked up as Daniel entered, her face a roadmap of purple bruises but her eyes clear. Well? She asked. FBI is coming. Agent named Reeves. She'll be here around 2 a.m. FBI? Jake's voice cracked slightly. Like, actual FBI? They've been investigating Gallo's operation for months. They just needed someone on the inside to break the silence. Daniel turned to the young man. You willing to testify? Give an official statement? Jake set down the baseball bat and stood straighter. Yeah, I am. It won't be easy. Gallo's lawyers will come after your credibility. They'll make you out to be a liar, someone with an agenda. I recorded what I saw. Truth is truth. Daniel nodded, seeing something in Jake he recognized from his own first days in the military. That moment when someone decides to be more than they were. You did good tonight. You saved my sister's life by reaching out. I should have stopped Franklin when you were outgunned, and you knew it. But you didn't stay silent after. That's what matters. While they waited for Agent Reeves, something unexpected began to happen. Daniel's phone started ringing. The first call came from a number he didn't recognize at 12:23 a.m. Is this Daniel Spears? A woman's voice, hesitant and frightened. I'm Amanda Baxter. I heard what happened at Murphy's tonight. My husband and we've been dealing with Gallo's people for 2 years. They forged my signature on a loan document. We've been too afraid to report it. Daniel's pulse quickened. Are you willing to give a statement to the FBI? A long pause. Then, yes, if it means stopping them. The second call came 15 minutes later. Then a third. By the time Agent Reeves arrived at 2:17 a.m., Daniel had contact information for 11 different victims of Gallo's operation, all willing to testify. Word had spread through Pinewood with the speed that only small-town gossip could achieve. Someone at Murphy's had called their cousin. The cousin had told their neighbor. The neighbor had texted their church group, and suddenly, people who'd been suffering in silence realized they weren't alone. Agent Reeves was a compact woman in her 40s, with steel-gray hair and eyes that missed nothing. She shook Daniel's hand, examined Gladys's injuries with professional concern, and spent 30 minutes taking Jake's initial statement. Then she sat at one of the bar's tables with her laptop open, reviewing the intelligence Daniel had extracted from Franklin. "This is good," she said finally. "Really good. Names, locations, specific amounts. If we can corroborate even half of this with victim testimony and financial records, we can bring RICO charges." "How long?" Gladys asked from her booth, Shelley still sleeping against her shoulder. "To build the case. Maybe a week. To execute, Monday morning, if I can get a judge to sign warrants over the weekend." Reeves looked at Daniel. "I'm going to need you to stay available for depositions, and your sister will need to file an official assault complaint." "Will she be safe?" Daniel's voice carried an edge that made Reeves meet his eyes directly. "I'm putting her in protective observation until we execute the warrants. You too, if you'll accept it." "I don't need protection, but I'm not leaving my sister." "Fair enough." Reeves closed her laptop. "Gallo's going to know something happened tonight when Franklin reports back. We need to move fast." As if on cue, Daniel's phone buzzed with another text from an unknown number. "Is it true? Did someone really stand up to Franklin? I have documents. Gallo's people have been threatening my family for months. Please tell me this is real." Daniel showed the message to Reeves. Her expression hardened with determination. "It's real," she said. "And by Monday morning, Vincent Gallo is going to wish he'd never heard the name Pinewood, Texas." Outside, the Texas night was giving way to the first gray light of dawn. Somewhere in his office on River Street, Vincent Gallo still believed he was untouchable. He had approximately 60 hours left to enjoy that delusion. Monday morning arrived in Pinewood with deceptive calm. The sun rose over River Street the way it always did, casting long shadows across the pawn shop where Vincent Gallo maintained his second-floor office. Inside that office, Gallo was drinking his first coffee of the day, reviewing collection reports, when the world came crashing through his door. The FBI didn't knock. At precisely 6:47 a.m., Special Agent Nicole Reeves led a 12-agent tactical team up the exterior stairs of 447 River Street. They were accompanied by 2 Texas Rangers and, notably, a contingent of federal marshals, bypassing Sheriff Briggs and his compromised department entirely. The battering ram made short work of Gallo's reinforced door, and within 30 seconds, the loan shark found himself face down on his expensive Persian rug with federal handcuffs biting into his wrists. "Vincent Gallo, you're under arrest for racketeering, wire fraud, conspiracy to commit extortion, and conspiracy to defraud financial institutions." Gallo tried to speak, but Agent Reeves wasn't finished. "You have the right to remain silent. I suggest you use it, because anything you say right now is going straight into the prosecution file." 2 blocks away, Donald Franklin was drinking his morning beer in the kitchenette of his apartment when his door exploded inward. He didn't even have time to stand before agents had him on the ground, his face pressed against linoleum that hadn't been cleaned in months. The shoulder Daniel had damaged Friday night screamed in protest as they cuffed him. "Donald Franklin, you are under arrest for assault, extortion, conspiracy to commit racketeering." The list went on. Franklin closed his eyes and thought about the Navy SEAL who'd told him this would happen, who'd given him a chance to walk away. He should have listened. Across Pinewood, 6 more doors came down simultaneously. Every collector on Franklin's list from Friday night found themselves in federal custody before they'd finished their breakfast. The coordination was surgical, the timing perfect. By 7:15 a.m., the entire enforcement arm of Gallo's operation was neutralized. But the arrests were only half of Operation Broken Chain. In Gallo's office, a forensic accounting team was already at work, cataloging evidence that would take months to fully process. The loan shark had been meticulous in his record-keeping, too meticulous. Every fraudulent loan, every forged signature, every property lien was documented in color-coded filing cabinets that now represented his complete destruction. Agent Reeves stood in the center of the office, watching her team work with the satisfaction of someone who'd been chasing this case for 8 months and could finally see the finish line. On Gallo's desk sat a leather-bound ledger that detailed payoffs to local officials with the precision of a CPA preparing tax returns. Sheriff Briggs, $5,000 monthly, delivered on the first Friday. Judge Atwater, $10,000 monthly, cash in a manila envelope left at the country club. 2 deputies, the county assessor, even the clerk at the property records office, all listed with amounts and dates stretching back 3 years. "Get the state attorney general on the phone," Reeves told her second-in-command. "We're going to need separate warrants for public corruption." By 9:30 a.m., Sheriff Briggs was pulled over on Highway 71 by Texas Rangers. He didn't resist. He'd seen this coming the moment his morning dispatcher told him the FBI had hit River Street without informing local law enforcement. The game was over, and everyone knew it. Judge Atwater was arrested in his chambers at the county courthouse, still wearing his robes, still believing his position would somehow protect him. It didn't. The federal charges didn't care about local judicial immunity. Daniel watched the raids from Agent Reeves's mobile command center, a converted RV parked 2 blocks from Gallo's office. He'd been deputized as a federal witness, which gave him access to the operational feed. Beside him, Gladys sat with Shelley on her lap, the little girl quiet and wide-eyed as she watched screens showing men in FBI jackets moving through buildings she recognized. "Is that Mr. Franklin?" Shelley asked, pointing to a screen showing Franklin being loaded into a federal transport van. "Yes, baby. Is he going to jail?" Gladys looked at Daniel, who nodded once. "Yes," Gladys said, "for a very long time." "Good." Shelley's voice was small but certain. "He hurt you. He won't hurt anyone else now." By noon, the scope of Gallo's operation was becoming clear. 63 families across 3 counties who'd been systematically defrauded, their properties stolen through fake signatures and manufactured debt. The total amount of fraudulent liens exceeded $4 million. Agent Reeves emerged from Gallo's office with a cardboard box full of files and an expression that mixed triumph with exhaustion. She found Daniel outside, where he was standing with Titan, watching the Texas Rangers finish cordoning off the crime scene. "We got everything," she said. "Financial records, victim lists, communication logs." Gallo kept copies of the forged loan documents, probably for leverage. "Now they're evidence. What happens to the victims? The fraudulent liens will be vacated. Properties returned. It'll take time. Courts move slowly even with clear evidence, but every family on that list will get their homes back." Daniel thought about his sister's face Friday night, beaten and terrified, believing she was going to lose everything her father had built. How long? Preliminary hearings will start within 30 days. Most of the liens should be dissolved within 90. Your sisters will be first. Assault victim with documented evidence gets priority. Gladys emerged from the mobile command center, moving slowly, still sore from her injuries. She walked to Daniel's side and looked at the building where Vincent Gallo had run his empire of fear. "It's really over?" she asked. "It's really over." She was quiet for a long moment. Then, all those families, all those people who were too scared to fight back, they'll get justice. Reeves is good at her job. Because you made one phone call. Daniel shook his head. Because you refused to sign those papers. Because Jake had the courage to record what he saw. Because 50 other victims decided to come forward once they knew they weren't alone. I just connected the dots. But they both knew it was more than that. Sometimes justice needed a catalyst. Sometimes breaking a cycle of fear required someone willing to step into the darkness and drag the monsters into the light. Agent Reeves approached them with a tablet, displaying a document. "Gladys, I need you to sign this witness statement for the federal prosecutor. And I should warn you, Gallo's lawyers are going to fight hard. This is going to be a long process." Gladys took the tablet, her hand steady despite everything. "I'm not going anywhere. And I'm not afraid anymore." She signed her name in clear, deliberate letters. Behind her, Shelley watched her mother stand tall, learning a lesson that would shape the rest of her life. That courage wasn't the absence of fear, but the refusal to let fear win. By sunset Monday, 8 people were in federal custody, 47 fraudulent liens were frozen pending investigation, and the town of Pinewood was beginning to remember what it felt like to breathe freely. Vincent Gallo's empire had fallen in less than 12 hours. It had taken him 3 years to build it, but it only took one person, refusing to stay silent, to bring it all crashing down. Operation Broken Chain was complete. Now came the harder work of healing. 3 weeks after Operation Broken Chain, Daniel Spears sat on the sagging front porch of his father's house and watched his niece throw a tennis ball for Titan. The German Shepherd retrieved it with tireless enthusiasm, dropping it at Shelley's feet and waiting with the infinite patience that made him such an effective working dog. The little girl's laughter carried across the yard, a sound that had been absent in the immediate aftermath of Murphy's Bar but was slowly, tentatively returning. The bruises on Gladys's face had faded to yellow-green shadows. The split in her lip had healed. But Daniel knew the invisible wounds would take longer. She emerged from the house with 2 glasses of sweet tea, handing one to her brother before settling into the wooden chair their father had built 30 years ago. For a while they just sat in comfortable silence, watching Shelley play, listening to the cicadas begin their evening chorus. "The prosecutor called this morning," Gladys said finally. "Gallo took a plea deal. 25 years, no parole eligibility for 15. Daniel nodded. "And Franklin?" 20 years. He's already been transferred to a federal facility in Georgia." She took a sip of tea. Agent Reeves said the other collectors got between 8 and 12 years each, depending on their level of involvement. "Good." Sheriff Briggs resigned. Judge Atwater was disbarred, and he's facing 5 years for corruption. Gladys's voice carried a note of satisfaction that Daniel understood completely. "The special election for sheriff is next month. Jake Murphy's father is running. Rosie's been campaigning for him at the diner. He'll win. People want someone they can trust. They fell quiet again. Shelley had convinced Titan to lie down so she could braid wildflowers into his collar. The dog endured this indignity with stoic grace, occasionally glancing at Daniel as if to say, quote, "The things I do for civilians." "I need to say something," Gladys said, her voice softer now. "About 3 years ago. About the things I said." Daniel set down his tea. "Gladdy, no, let me finish. I told you that you didn't know anything about love or commitment because you were married to the Navy. I said you were judgmental and controlling and that you couldn't accept that I'd chosen someone you didn't approve of." She paused, gathering courage. "You were right about Tyler. You saw what he was, and I was too proud to admit it. Too afraid to admit that I'd made a mistake. And when you tried to warn me, I pushed you away because hearing the truth hurt worse than living the lie." "I could have been gentler," Daniel said. "I could have supported you instead of trying to fix everything. You're a SEAL. Fixing problems is what you do. You are not a problem to be fixed. You're my sister." Gladys's eyes filled with tears. "I was so angry at you for being right. And then when everything fell apart with Tyler, when the debt started piling up and the threats started coming, I was too ashamed to call. I kept thinking you'd say, 'I told you so,' and I couldn't bear it. I would never." Daniel stopped, because part of him wondered if that was true. 3 years ago, younger and more rigid in his thinking, would he have been able to resist the temptation to be proven right? He wanted to believe he'd have been better than that, but honesty required admitting he didn't know for certain. "I should have reached out," he said instead. "Pride's a two-way street. I was waiting for you to apologize, and you were waiting for me to stop being angry. Meanwhile, you were going through hell alone. I wasn't completely alone. I had Shelley and Rosie, but you didn't have family, and that's on both of us." Gladys wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. "When I saw you walk through that door at Murphy's, I didn't know whether to be relieved or terrified. Part of me thought you might just shake your head and leave, let me deal with the consequences of my choices." Daniel turned to look at her directly. "There is nothing you could do that would make me walk away when you need me. You understand that? Your blood, your family, that doesn't have conditions attached. Even when I'm stubborn and stupid and pushing you away? Especially then." She laughed, but it turned into a sob halfway through. Daniel reached over and took her hand, and they sat like that for a long moment, years of hurt and misunderstanding slowly beginning to dissolve in the Texas heat. "I'm afraid to need people," Gladys said quietly. "After Dad died, after Mom had already been gone for so long, and then Tyler leaving the way he did, it felt like everyone I depended on either died or abandoned me. Easier to just not depend on anyone. That's not living. That's just surviving," says the man who spent the last decade deployed to places he can't talk about. Daniel smiled slightly. "Fair point, but I'm trying to do better. I've got 3 months of leave left before I have to report back. Thought maybe I'd spend it here. Help you fix up the porch, maybe paint the trim, teach Shelley how to throw a proper spiral." Gladys squeezed his hand. "You don't have to. I want to. If you'll let me." She was quiet for a moment, then nodded. "I'd like that. Shelley would too. She keeps asking when Uncle Daniel is leaving, and every time I tell her, not yet, she looks relieved." They watched Shelley attempt to teach Titan to shake hands. The dog, highly trained in tactical operations, seemed confused by this civilian nonsense, but gamely lifted his paw anyway. "She's resilient," Daniel observed. "Takes after her mother. She has nightmares sometimes. About that night, I hear her crying and I go in, and she asks if the bad man is coming back. What do you tell her?" "I tell her no. I tell her Uncle Daniel and Titan made sure the bad man can't hurt anyone anymore. And that seems to help." Gladys paused. "You're her hero, you know. She tells everyone at school about her uncle who's a Navy SEAL with a police dog. Titan's not exactly a police dog. Try explaining that distinction to a 7-year-old." The sun was setting now, painting the Texas sky in shades of orange and purple. Shelley ran up to the porch, breathless and happy, Titan trotting beside her. "Mama, can Titan sleep in my room tonight, please?" Gladys looked at Daniel, who shrugged. "He's trained to sleep anywhere. If it makes her feel safe, I don't mind." "Okay, baby. But you have to promise to actually sleep, not stay up all night petting him." "I promise." Shelley threw her arms around her mother's waist, then turned to Daniel. "Uncle Daniel, are you staying for dinner? If your mom's cooking, she's making spaghetti, then I'm definitely staying." Shelley darted back inside, Titan following with the patient resignation of a warrior drafted into domestic service. Gladys stood, collecting the empty glasses. "You know, for 3 years I kept telling myself I didn't need you, that I was better off handling everything alone. And now?" She looked at her brother, this man who'd driven through the night when she needed him, who'd faced down her demons without hesitation, who'd stayed when he could have left. "Now I think maybe family isn't about never needing anyone. It's about knowing someone will be there when you do. Daniel stood and pulled her into a hug, careful of her healing ribs, but firm enough to convey everything words couldn't quite capture. I'm here, Gladys. However long you need me, I'm here. Even when your leave runs out? Phone calls, video chats, every leave rotation I get. And if something happens, if you need me, I'm on the first plane home. That's a promise. Don't make promises you can't keep. I don't. They stood there on the porch of their father's house, in the town where they'd grown up, and felt the broken pieces of their relationship beginning to knit back together. It would take time. There would be difficult conversations ahead, old wounds that still needed tending. But they'd made a start. Inside, Shelley was setting the table, singing off-key to herself. The sound drifted through the screen door like a benediction. Come on, Gladys said, heading inside. Before the spaghetti gets cold. Daniel followed her, and Titan followed him. And for the first time in 3 years, the Foster family was whole again. Not perfect, not unmarked by pain, but together. And in Pinewood, Texas, where fear had ruled for too long, people were remembering how to trust again. How to speak up. How to believe that sometimes, when you stood against darkness, someone would stand with you. The scars would remain. But the healing had begun.